We'll cut across to our reporters in just a while. I want to connect to our guest this evening, Raghav Chandra, former chairman, the National Highways Authority of India, NHIA, Duno Roy, he's an ecologist, director of the Hazard Center, Dr. Anjal Prakash, research director, Bharati Institute of Public Policy, ISB. Cutting across first to Mr. Chandra. Mr. Chandra, there's something that is said very often when you construct roads and tunnels in the mountains. It's listen to what the mountains say, especially at a time of widening of roads. Multiple projects, be it in Himachal, be it in Uttarakhand, have faced the full wrath of the Himalayan fury when, especially looking at widening roads. And in this was the main intention, to widen that road for the Char Dham Express.
Yes, it is indeed. There is need for great sensitivity, especially in the context of climate change, for all highway projects in the mountains, and particularly so in the case of the Himalayas, which are a relatively newer mountain formation and therefore known to be more fragile. There is a greater need for sensitivity, concern, and for handling such projects with great care and caution.
Duno Roy, if you're joining us, many a times there have been activists, environmentalists, ecologists like you who've constantly raised, the issue of going in for rampant construction without even... Mr. Roy, can you hear me? Sir, would you put your audio... You're on mute, sir. You're on mute.
I'm on mute?
Yes,
no,
we can hear you
mute.
now. We can hear you, Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, time in and time again, ecologists like you have raised the issue of rampant construction, especially in the mountains. Roads such as this, dams, bridges, you've constantly raised, and we continue to pay the price of that.
That's true, and nobody is listening in spite of repeated experiences.
Would you, Mr. Roy, reflect on what went wrong in this particular project?
Essentially, the two valleys of the Ganga and the Yamuna are separated by what is called a thrust area. That is, the mountains are thrusting up in the middle of these two valleys, and it is through that thrust mountain that they are digging a tunnel, which is a very foolish thing to do because it's much more fragile than other parts of the Himalayas. That is, the rock structure there is loose, it's fractured because the rocks are pressing against each other, so they all tend to smash each other into little pieces. And when you try and drill a huge tunnel through such a geological formation, you're basically asking for trouble. So even if you follow what are called the provisions for drilling tunnels in mountain rock, it is not going to work in such an area because this does not correspond to the normal kind of structure that you find in stable mountains. The Himalayan mountains are a very unstable structure. We somehow forget that. The Indian plate is constantly pressing against the Asian plate, and every year it's advancing. So the moment two plates advance like this, you're going to have instability above the ground and below the ground. And we've constantly warned that drilling such huge tunnels is ridiculous. They should have been much smaller, much more, compact, so that one could handle the stresses in the tectonic plates.
Well, that's the sad part, the irony of it, because one can go back to the idiom and talk of the canary in the coal mines, because there have been many who've been talking of it over years, and what we are looking at is impending disaster by what many of the projects, especially in Uttarakhand and Himachal, are concerned. I want to, with what you speak of, Mr. Roy, our investigative team also found out very clearly that tectonic fault lines were completely ignored this time around, and I'll bring in my colleague Vidisha on that. But Dr. Anjal Prakash, the sheer fact that the company in charge of this completely flouted basic SOPs, where even an escape tunnel, which is required over a tunnel of 3 kilometers, and this was well over that. Something like that was also not in place.
I'm not able to hear.
Dr. Prakash, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Dr. Prakash, the sheer fact that the company entrusted with building this tunnel, Navyug Engineering in particular, is in charge of many other projects across Uttarakhand, iconic projects of that, and India. The sheer fact they did not even follow a basic SOP, which was to build an escape route, which is essential SOP for any tunnels exceeding 3 kilometers.
Yeah. So I lost your voice. I can't hear you now.
Did you get the question, Dr. Prakash?
I got the question.
Yeah, go ahead,
I got the question. Yeah. So let me just say that, I echo the co-panelists that these are very fragile ecosystem, and we must, whenever we are building anything, we must do, we must have to take the extra care. That's number one. The companies which are, the company which is in question at this moment, I would say that we must stop all construction by the company and re-evaluate, the projects that they are involved in, because this is a huge mishap that has happened. 41 lives were trapped for 17 days, 400 plus hours human life, and plus the ecology which is at stake. I think we must reevaluate. Also, you have to understand, Preeti, that these projects were planned when climate change has not stricken as much as we see now. Last 3 to 4 years have been very tough for Himachal Pradesh. Uttarakhand this year has gone through a huge problem. Himachal Pradesh has gone through huge problem. So the fragility of the region has to be taken into account, re-evaluating these projects and trying to see whether it is fitting in within the international standard that we have. We must follow the international standards to make sure that these projects are there. There's always a talk about security regions versus development. I think this debate also needs to settle within, and we need to have more time to discuss how, what is the trade-off that we have from these two regions. We also have to see, and I have traveled across China, I've seen how China is building. So there's a one argument that always comes that China is building very well, and why should we not? But you have to understand the command and control system that China has versus what we have in India, the rent seeking that we have in India versus what we have in China. So huge difference in technology, huge difference in the way in which they are executing, plus the fragility of environment, which is at stake.
Mr. Roy, do you think this will serve as an alarm call, or do you think this is going to be one such incident which, after the euphoria of the rescue dies down, so will the questions that should be raised?
Well, the rescue itself tells us what the problem is. Eventually, it was completed by rat hole miners. Rat hole miners, they go in through a tunnel which is roughly 2 feet, not more than that, 2 feet wide. And that is an appropriate technology for a fragile ecosystem. That is why they managed to rescue these miners. The rat hole technology, in fact, has been outlawed in this country, saying it's unsafe. And the complete discordance that we have, that this unsafe technology is what actually saved those miners. Now, we tend to again and again ignore this. And I think that, the specifications that are being spelled out about escape tunnels and all, they still fall within the same understanding, that the escape tunnel will also be about 20 feet wide or more. Now, that is not going to help, because that escape tunnel itself is going to be in a dangerous situation. That's one point. The second point is that these projects cannot be evaluated in isolation. Each project has an impact on another project downstream or upstream. So there has to be not just single project evaluations, but comprehensive environmental and social impact assessments for all projects in a drainage basin. We've emphasized this time and again, and every time we have been dismissed, saying that you don't need comprehensive assessments. Project assessments are sufficient. This kind of attitude is prevalent in government, in industry, in consultants, and I don't think it is going to change very soon.
You don't think
there
that?
have been 6 tragedies in the last 5 years, and we still have not learned.
Dr. Ranjan Prakash, do you see any lessons being picked up, or and I don't blame the kind of cynicism that Mr. Duno Roy keeps, because we've had multiple incidents. But look at it, this particular company right now is in charge with creating iconic projects across the country. Now, time will tell if they continue to build these projects, or at least there'll be a complete stop on those till the time a proper investigation is conducted.
No, I share the cynicism that Professor Rai has. I also feel the same. A couple of months before we were talking about Joshimath, I was on the same panel with Rajdeep, and we were discussing the same issues. After a couple of months down the line, we are talking today on this mishap which has happened. Right. So this is, I know it's becoming an yearly phenomenon now. It's becoming much more frequent than we have actually ever thought. So I would actually urge for the government, and I have 3 points to put here. One is to stop all the construction which is happening, reevaluate with an international standard, and have the data on the public domain so that people in the civil society can also monitor this. That's number one. Number two, I would say that local knowledge is very important. What Professor Rai has talked about, other panelists has talked about, the local people have a lot of knowledge about the ecology of the way mountain function. That has never taken into account when you're constructing these areas. I'm not denying that there's a need for construction in these areas, because I have also done long field work, and I've seen people, in one incident when a pregnant woman had to be brought down to a nearest nearest center. It took hours, and then in the meantime, mishap has happened. So basic infrastructure is needed for people in these areas. These are not only fragile mountain region, it's also one of the thickest populated regions. So we must take these into account. That's the last point. Also, I would say that the climate change part has to be taken into account, because that is disrupting the entire system in which it's operating.
Right. Mr. Chandra, would you want to input on that?
I'd just like to say that we have to draw a very healthy balance between development and environment. Having said that, there's no question of abandoning a project connecting, to Char Dham at this stage, or to jettison this company. What is more important is to ensure that safeguard measures are taken for the future, which will prevent any such mishap from happening. And for that, apart from geomorphological studies, we have to ensure that the DPRs are properly done, because most of the time the blame comes on the contractor, when actually the consultants who have prepared the detailed project report do not do a proper survey and do a proper testing which should be done on the ground. It is not properly proof-checked by the agencies involved. NHIDCL is meant to be a specialist agency in the field of mountain highways. They should have properly proof-checked all the DPRs, and the requisite escape tunnel should have got started along with the routine construction of the tunnel, because an escape tunnel has to be done ultimately. But it should have been done, because of the fragile nature of the mountain, should have been done at this stage itself. So if it's not been done, I think that's very surprising.
Well, that's surprising and shocking.
All major tunnels have escape routes.
I apologize, I'm interrupting, because we've come, I'm unfortunately reached the end of this bulletin, but I appreciate all three gentlemen taking the time out and joining us.